Hi Year 10, get your pens ready and you can start making notes as you go along and watch the video and listen. So in the passage that we're studying today, as you've already seen, the witches on Macbeth's request call up three different spirits, three apparitions to predict Macbeth's future. He's then presented with a vision of Banquo and a line of kings who are Banquo's descendants. So, as you've seen before, Macbeth is always trying to order the forces of darkness to no great effect. So you can see here Macbeth using this imperative, tell me thou unknown power. Now you see the dash here, that means an interruption. And so I'm going to do a line there to show that that's also an interruption, because he also gets interrupted down here, but one word more. And you can see that both times he's interrupted by the first witch. So that shows the power of the witches over Macbeth, that they're controlling the conversation. And the first witch even says, he knows thy thought. In other words, this first apparition, this head with a helmet on it, even knows Macbeth's thoughts. And then the witches reply with their own imperative, and actually Macbeth obeys the witches, not so much the other way around. Here where Macbeth says, but one word more, he's not going to get more than he's allowed, and the witch interrupts him to tell Macbeth he, in other words, the spirit, will not be commanded. So this simple declarative sentence admonishes, that means tells off Macbeth and puts him in his place. We know who's in power here. So the second apparition is a bloody child. And this bloody child could imply the children of Macduff that are about to be killed. You could add that as an extra note there. It could also be an echo of this baby of a prostitute that's just been put into the pot, or at least the finger of it has, or even of Lady Macbeth's child which died. So we've got some equivocation going on here. An equivocation, as you saw in the PowerPoint, is when you use unclear, in other words, ambiguous language to conceal the real truth. So the second apparition says, none of women born shall harm Macbeth. And as I'm sure you already know, in actual fact, Macduff is able to harm Macbeth on the technical get-out clause. He wasn't born of woman in the usual way. He was born by caesarean section. But Macbeth thinks, what need I fear of thee? He thinks he's safe because everybody's born of woman as far as Macbeth's concerned. Notice, though, the word double that he uses here. He says, I'll make assurance double sure. So in the notes over on that side of the page, it says, make security even more certain. But he's using one of the witch's words here. And as you saw last lesson, Macbeth does start to use the witch's words that implies the extent to which they're controlling his thoughts. Note here, he says, thou shalt not live, so Macduff, you shall not live, so that I can tell pale-hearted fear it lies. And notice here that he's personifying fear. He's saying that fear is pale-hearted and tells lies, and it's almost as if Macbeth's fear is so vivid and so strong that it's come alive. And note here that he says that once he's killed Macduff, he'll be able to sleep in spite of the thunder. Well, as we all know, Macbeth throughout the play, as well as Lady Macbeth, suffers from insomnia as a result of his tortured mind, and so this sleep is impossible. Again, notice here, the witches are instructing Macbeth with imperative, listen, speak not to it. They're directing the rules of how this engagement with the spirits will work. So other ways that the witches lead Macbeth into a full sense of security. The third spirit says, be lie-metal proud and take no care. In other words, don't worry. Macbeth has a lot to worry about, but they don't want him to think so. Macbeth shall never vanquish be until great Burnham wood, so you won't be beaten in battle until the wood comes against you to Dunsinane. And so obviously this equivocation hides the real truth. Macbeth thinks this will never happen, but actually, as you already know, it's a battle tactic. The soldiers are commanded by Macduff to cut down the branches of the trees, and so they carry the wood to Dunsinane. And again, notice Macbeth's use of future tense, showing his certainty that that will never be. He doesn't realise the extent to which the witches are equivocating and manipulating him. And then he goes on to describe the idea of woods not being able to move. Who can impress the forest, bid the tree? Notice he's using these words: forest, tree, root, wood, Burnham, which is the name of the wood. And we've got a semantic field of trees and nature here. And what Macbeth's basically saying is that it's an unnatural thing for forests to move. It can't happen, so it never will. But as you know from Macbeth's behaviour throughout the play, Macbeth's behaviour was and is at this stage unnatural. One way in which he's behaved unnaturally is that he's upset the natural order of things. He's upset the great chain of being by killing God's anointed King Duncan. And so if Macbeth can do unnatural things like that, then unnatural things like the wood moving will happen. And then Macbeth also goes on to think, he talks about himself in the third person here: our high place Macbeth shall live the lease of nature. As you can see in the notes on the side, it says he'll live the length of natural life, pay his breath to time and mortal custom, so live the usual lifespan. So Macbeth thinks he'll die a natural death. This is not true. We know he's going to be killed, but this idea of him living out his time is explored in more detail in the speech in Act 5, Scene 5, when he really does realise Lady Macbeth has already died before her time. He says she should have died hereafter, and Macbeth will die too soon. He says, out, out, brief candle. Again, notice he's using these imperatives to the witches. Doesn't work. Tell me, he says. He says, I will be satisfied. Again, he's using the future tense, conveying his certainty, but it's not certain. He won't be satisfied. The witches won't tell him. He says, deny me this and an eternal curse fall on you. Well, that's a ridiculous thing to do. You can't curse witches. It's futile, meaning it's pointless. How is it possible to curse the devil's servants? When you curse someone, you almost send them to the devil. They're already with the devil. And again, he's saying, let me know. Another imperative doesn't work. However, the witch's imperative, seek to know no more. Well, he does carry on seeking to know more, but at the same time, they don't tell him anymore. He is about to see this vision of Banquo, but it's something that he knows about already. So we're now moving on to this vision of this show of 8 kings. So it's a parade of 8 kings, the last with a glass in his hand, in other words, a mirror, Banquo's ghost following. And these words show, they're significant more than just because they're showing Macbeth the kings, but also because, as I mentioned last lesson, in Macbeth there's a motif, in other words, a recurring image of the idea of eyes and seeing. Do you remember you saw before Macbeth said to Banquo's ghost at the banquet, thou hast no speculation in those eyes, meaning you have no ability to see in your eyes. Whereas actually Banquo probably does have the ability to see his ghost. It's just wishful thinking from Macbeth. And there's this idea throughout the play of Macbeth being forced to see things that he doesn't want to see. So there's another imperative down where he's trying to tell this ghost of Banquo to go away, go back down to hell. Notice before where it says descend each time with each of the apparitions when they leave the stage. That means, for example, the first apparition descends, it means going back down to hell. So that's where they come from. So he's trying to get Banquo to go back down to hell. Banquo doesn't. Apart from anything else, he's probably not even in hell. He's also really quite rude to the witches. He says, filthy hags. It's not the best way to treat people who you want to get more information from. And then he also questions the witches, saying, why do you show me this? But it almost functions as a rhetorical question because they don't give any explanation. And the effect it has on him is really, really intense. He says, "Thy crown," that Banquo is wearing, "does sear mine eyeballs." And as you can see from the notes at the side, to sear means burn. He feels like his eyeballs are being burnt by the ghost of Banquo. Even further, where he says "start eyes," again, you can see from the side that start means jump from your sockets. He's using an imperative to his own eyeballs, and it's like he wants his eyes, he's so against the idea of seeing this that he wants his eyes to separate from his self. Now he's using the future tense again, "I'll see no more." But it's not true. Macbeth can't stop this. And he's still seeing things. "And some I see, horrible sight, now I see." This is all so awful for Macbeth. Now, I would like to draw your attention here to what Macbeth is saying now. "And some I see, that twofold balls and triple scepters carry horrible sight." You can see in the notes what twofold balls and triple scepters are, but there's actually a mistake in the notes. It says representing the two orbs Macbeth carried at his two coronations in Scotland and England, and then it's the same thing here. Macbeth now rules Scotland, England and Ireland. That's actually a mistake, and that should be James the First and Sixth. That's because he was the 6th King James of Scotland, but the 1st King James of England. So you need to actually change that in your notes. So make sure you do that, and make sure you're aware, ideally, when you write about James in the exam, you'll demonstrate that you're aware of this double crown of Scotland and England. There were 2 separate countries at the time, by calling him James the First and Sixth. So moving on to the next page. Not going to talk too much about this speech, apart from these last few lines are possibly even flattering King James, and some critics think that they might have been, the actors playing the witches might have even turned around to say these lines to King James, "this great king," because, as you're probably aware, Macbeth wrote the play partly in order to please King James, and would have been performed directly to the king. So Lennox, Macbeth's one of Macbeth's men, arrives. There's a little bit of stickamithia there. Take a moment to write down this word. Stickamithia means when you've got alternate lines. They're actually sharing lines of pentameter here. Now, Macbeth says, "infected by the air whereon they ride about the witches, and damned all those that trust in him." So this is deeply ironic. Macbeth trusts the witches, meaning he's damned. But it's almost as if he's saying this about other people. Lennox goes on to tell Macbeth that Macduff is fled to England, and notice that Macbeth, rather than directly reacting to it, all he does is repeat Lennox's last few words, showing the extent of his shock and worry about what Macduff has done, particularly in light of the witch's recent predictions. So Macbeth's last speech in the scene, where it says aside, it means he says it to the audience. And notice that he intends now, it says, "From this moment, the very firstlings of my heart," so the first feelings of my heart shall be the first things of my hand, the first things that I do. So from now on, he intends to act on impulse. However, this is out of character for Macbeth. Yes, he does act on impulse here, where he decides to kill Macduff's wife and children. But actually, throughout the play, the one thing that draws us to Macbeth as a character, despite the fact that he is a cruel murderer, is the fact that he is a thinker, he is a warrior, he's a tortured soul, he's almost a philosopher. And it's almost a bit of a relief that he doesn't spend the rest of the play just acting on impulse. And you will see later on during the play, again, I've mentioned before that soliloquy, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow in Act 5, Scene 5, where Macbeth ponders the meaning of life. And thank goodness he does that, because that speech is beautiful and devastating. But on from Macbeth as a philosopher and back to Macbeth as a vile killer. He wants to put to the edge of the sword Macduff's wife, his babes, and all unfortunate souls that trace him in his line. In other words, all of Macduff's descendants. So it's a premeditated murder of innocence. But notice something here. The witch's equivocation, in other words, telling truths but hiding the real truth along the way. It makes Macbeth evil, but it also causes him to be a failure. Because so far they told him Banquo's children will be kings, so Macbeth thinks, right, I'll get rid of Banquo and Fleance, but he only manages to get Banquo killed, not Fleance. The witches say beware Macduff, but Macduff escapes, and so Macbeth decides to kill his wife and kill his children, but not kill Macduff. And so not only is it evil, but it's futile. Again, that word futile meaning pointless. Another outcome of the witches' equivocation is the fact that their predictions are contradictory. That is, they say beware Macduff, but then they also give him two reasons to Macbeth why he's safe. Number one, no man of woman born shall harm you. Number two, you won't be vanquished until Birnam Wood comes to Dunsinane, to your castle. So two reasons why he's safe. So Macduff escaping doesn't actually worry Macbeth that much because whatever happens, if Macbeth kills Macduff, great. He knows that the prediction of Macbeth shall never vanquished be will come true because he's managed to get rid of his one enemy. However, if the fact that Macduff has escaped means that that prediction has come true about beware Macduff. So this means that Macbeth will trust them whether Macduff lives or dies. And this shows quite how foolish, despite the fact that he's a thinker, a philosopher even, he is an utter fool for trusting the witches. Well done for getting to the end of the video. Have a break, have a relax.